to be hosting a panel discussion now, hosted by the Atlantic Council. I'd like to please welcome to the stage the moderator for the session, who's also going to be introducing the speakers, Mr. Reid Blakemore, who's the Director for Research and Programs for Atlantic Council. Please do make your way to the stage and introduce the esteemed speakers. Thank you so much.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Reid Blakemore, Director of Research and Programs for the Atlantic Council's Global Energy Center. We're a foreign policy think tank based in Washington, D.C., and it's such a delight to join you all this morning to kick off Africa Energy Week. This discussion is going to be focused on accelerating U.S.-Africa clean energy trade and technology partnerships, where we hope to have a robust conversation around how we can develop the partnerships and investment strategies needed to support clean energy deployment throughout the region. Given that South Africa in particular, among many of the other nations represented here this week, have set net zero emissions targets by 2050 and are also a critical voice as we navigate global energy transition, climate action, and economic development, it's a privilege to host this discussion with you all, and I'd like to welcome my two distinguished panelists this morning to the floor right now. That would be Mr. Thebe Mamakoko, the Director of Climate Change at the Department of Mineral Resources and Energy for the Government of South Africa. Please join me on stage, sir. And Ms. Emily Bell, a non-resident fellow with the Atlantic Council's Africa Center. Please join me on stage. There we go. So before I begin, I think I want to help frame our discussion a little bit. We'll start big and I think dive into the sub-Saharan African region. I'll turn, Emily, to you for some thoughts on that. And then I think diving specifically into South Africa's plans on this front, Thebe, I'd love to hear your thoughts. But first, when we look on the whole, emerging markets are poised to constitute the majority of economic growth through 2050, and ensuring that this growth continues both apace and in line with net zero targets is critical. It's an area, I think, where partnerships are, both in policy and in commerce are foundational to success. But the makeup of those partnerships and the energy technologies, financial tools, and policy strategies underpinning those partnerships need to be appropriately contextualized by, region by region, country by country. And just to throw out a few ideas out there, which I think we can cover in this conversation today. When you unpack the value chain of clean energy technologies, from material inputs to project design, to construction and operations, to support services, where can we find the greatest need or value proposition for partnership? Second, how does market maturity from the perspective of existing regulatory structures, available infrastructure, and commercial activity throughout a particular region shape the environment for joint ventures, technical assistance, or concessional financing? And then to the very point of finance, how do each of these above areas shape the project development pipeline when we think about de-risking and building a robust number of bankable projects? As I like to think of it, how do we move building our project pipeline from projects that are PowerPoints to projects that are receiving FID? And of course, finally, thinking through all of these issues in relation to the rapidly approaching COP28 next month in Dubai, where I think we need to do a lot of work to continue some of the momentum around energy access and sustainable economic development that we saw come from the COP27 agenda in Sharm el-Sheikh last year. That in tandem with how we think about when we reflect on the broader macroeconomic environment, how much more seriously we need to take the role of finance in enabling our energy transition and global economic goals. So to kick us off, I'd like to start with Emily, right? To cover, when we think about the sub-Saharan region, right? What are the key features of that energy story? In particular, how do we need to be thinking about partnerships in a clean energy development transition.
Okay, thanks. Hi everyone, and many thanks to the Global Energy Center of the Atlantic Council for organizing such an exciting event. As a fellow of the Africa Center of the Atlantic Council, I'm delighted to be here today with high-level experts, and many thanks to all of you for being here today with us. Today's conversation is about accelerating US-Africa clean energy trade and technology partnerships. This is more critical than ever to have this conversation. And before hearing from all of you, I would like to underline a few points to contextualize the discussion. So first, highlight. Africa, and especially sub-Saharan Africa, faces a challenge that is both environmental and economic in nature. So today, Africa is a continent expected to suffer the most from climate change, despite contributing the least to global warming. Sub-Saharan Africa has the lowest energy access rate in the world, with over 600 million people lacking access to electricity. The energy demand is expected to skyrocket. So today, African countries have to reconcile economic development with climate change mitigation and adaptation. So you all know this, but it's worth always recalling that the African continent is as big as it is diverse. If every African country is different with its own assets and challenges when it comes to clean energy. Second highlight, Africa as a whole has a huge potential. So Africa has abundant renewable resources, including solar, wind, hydropower, and biomass to provide clean, affordable, and reliable energy to the continent, while also meeting decarbonization targets. African countries have already developed clean energy infrastructure, and to name a few examples. The first one, the Lake Turkana wind power station, located in Kenya, is Africa's largest wind power installation. It can provide enough energy to power 1 million homes. Second example, let's mention the Noor Ouarzazate solar complex in Morocco. It is the largest concentrated solar power plant on the continent, with a capacity of 580 megawatts. The Nachtigal hydropower project in Cameroon, a 420 megawatt hydropower plant under construction of the Sanaga River, is my third example. But I really think that much more can be done. Africa is home to 60% of the best solar resources in the world, yet Africa is home to only 1% of installed solar PV capacity. Third highlight, Africa has to face roadblocks, and the US has a key role to play. So to meet their net zero climate goals, a lot of countries, including the United States and the European Union, are adapting their existing infrastructure to lower their carbon emissions. African countries face a different challenge. They have to close the energy infrastructure gap by building green infrastructure from the beginning. And I really think that energy infrastructure is a central part of the story. Challenges are numerous. To name a few. First one is access to financing. Financing access to energy, and especially to green energy, remains the main challenge. Mobilizing balance in investment for infrastructure will be necessary. Second challenge, capacity building. Building local expertise in clean energy technologies is crucial. Third challenge, policy and regulatory frameworks. We have to establish a clear, supportive policy and regulation. It's essential to facilitate private sector involvement. Fourth challenge, energy storage. Energy storage solutions such as battery technology are vital to address intermittent supply. So today, the significant need for financing green infrastructure creates opportunities for investment in sub-Saharan Africa, and especially from the OECD states. The United States is the world's largest economy, an innovation leader in clean energy technology, and an historic partner of the African continent. The US has an opportunity to contribute to decarbonization in Africa while establishing strategic economic and trade partnerships. So thank you very much, and I wish all of you a fruitful discussion.
Thank you, Emily. And before I turn to Thebe, I might ask you one quick follow-up question. You mentioned the role of finance throughout these transitions, and Of course, the African Development Bank has estimated that the entire continent faces a infrastructure investment gap of over $100 billion, right? For years, you and a lot of your work have been calling for increased public and private investment into the continent. Do you think that the US, EU, and other OECD countries are on the right track to addressing infrastructure investment gaps? And if not, what policies should be enacted or what action should be taken to address this issue more effectively and perhaps more urgently, given some of the broader macroeconomic pressures we're seeing as a result of inflation currently around the world?
Yeah, thank you. This is a difficult question. This is a $1 million question. So I think that indeed the infrastructure gap in Africa is more than significant. But I really think that the infrastructure gap in Africa is also an opportunity for green and resilient growth. So given the size of the infrastructure gap, mobilizing all sources of funding will be essential. So today, African governments are the first source of infrastructure financing. They represent 37% of total commitments. But this gap is too large today to be bridged by public funding alone. So to bridge this investment gap, African countries need to explore multiple financing sources and notably private funding. I really think that the role to be played by the private sector is essential. So of course, international organizations and DFIs as well as donor countries, you mentioned the United States, the European Union and other OECD states, have a key role to play in financing, and it's essential that they continue to do so. So to answer your question, I'm convinced that the United States, the EU, and other OECD countries have to. First one, they have to continue expanding their pipeline of projects in Africa. And they can do it through their development agencies and contribution to multilateral banks that leverage private sector participation. Second point, I really think that they have to draft international green finance frameworks in a way that it takes into account the diversity of African markets, and it is very important. And third challenge, I really think that they have to share expertise. Thanks to their involvement in many projects across emerging countries, the United States and the European Union countries have acquired an incredible view of success factors. They are therefore in a unique position to facilitate lesson learned, sharing, and support African authorities.
Wonderful. Thebe, I'd like to turn to you now for some opening remarks. You serve as, in your role, you serve as senior energy negotiator at the Department of Mineral Resources Energy in South Africa. You're responsible for multilateral negotiations on energy and climate change related matters. That includes part of the South African climate negotiating team under the UNFCCC and G20. When we bring all of this down to a South Africa focus, how do you see this issue around accelerating clean energy deployment, and particularly, what are the partnerships you think are most useful, or the partnership models you think are most useful?
Thank you very much, Rit. I think you are asking me a very important question, and I think maybe I must also indicate that I'm from a department that is responsible to gear the type of solutions and interventions that the country seeks to implement as we are responding to climate change. And as you are saying, within the broader context of climate change, you would know that South Africa is we have made clear commitments and intentions in terms of how do we respond. We've put some policies and measures in place to respond to climate change. And of course, I think those have yielded some of the current partnerships that we see happening, one of which, coming from the Glasgow, which is still a process that we are engaging with as a country and as a department. But from the department perspective, you would know that we are saying that we are open to transition, and we have set a clear roadmap in terms of the targets that we need to take. We have through the IRP outlined the kind of interventions that we need, and these interventions, of course, require funding. We do acknowledge that South Africa alone will not carry this. Therefore, partnerships are quite critical. Hence, the JET-P and the JET-IP. And I indicated that it's a subject of discussions because it's not so much about only to deal with the matters of grid, but also to ensure that the communities that are relying on these sources from which we are agreeing that we should transition are not left stranded. And I think we may want to, at some point in these discussions, reflect on some of the interventions that have already taken place in South Africa as part of the transition. The decommissioning of Komati, for example, and some of the challenges that came out of that to be able to assist us with the nature of the transition that we want to see, but also the acceleration, as you were saying, of clean energy into our mix. Given the kind of grid that we have, the requirements or the work that still needs to be done in addressing that. I can tell you now that recently, as we were discussing, the JET-IP, you get to understand that it's not going to be an easy process. And it's not an overnight process, because currently we are sitting at a situation where just to address a 14,000 kilometers of grid in terms of strengthening, to allow at least 60% uptake of the kind of renewable energy that we are generating from solar and wind, will require almost 2.7 billion over the next 7 years, as we are targeting 2030. So I think I'm saying it gives you a sense of what are the challenges that we need to bear in mind as we are talking about the acceleration of clean energy, but also ensuring that we have access to energy. She spoke about broadly in Africa the potential of these renewable energy and clean energy sources, but you look at the access. You look at I think there's a study that IRENA did in terms of the penetration of renewables in the continent. In South Africa, for example, we are battling with issues of unemployment and poverty, and how do we ensure that these resources are contributing to that, to the improvement of the lives of the people. So I'm going to pause here for now and maybe allow you to...
Yeah. I think you touched on 3 items that I want to double click on. You spoke about the underlying resource base for clean energy technologies, the minerals and metals, et cetera, that we need to get out of the ground there. You spoke about the Jet P, right, and whether or not that is that is a successful framework for engaging on issues around just energy transition, but financing just energy transition. And then finally, I think you also highlighted some of the issues around the coal decommissioning, fossil fuels, and the role of perhaps CCUS in sort of managing those emissions, even as the energy transition moves forward and South Africa pursues its net zero goals. I might start with the critical minerals piece and ask your perspective on this. We see multifold increases in demand for mining in order to power our energy transition goals. South Africa is one of the world's leading mining and mineral processing countries. What opportunities do you see for South Africa in so much as opportunities for investment and collaboration with other partners, whether that be the US, whether that be other OECD countries, when it comes to increasing the supply of these minerals in the clean energy technology pipeline?
Again, I think I'll keep on taking this discussion to a lower level, because I think the challenge, at least from where we are sitting, is to have this discussion at that high level, which is very important, and also talk about this research and all of that. But I think ultimately it's how we take down these interventions to where it matters most. And I think from our point of view, we took a decision that we need to firstly understand our critical challenges, as I indicated, which is poverty and unemployment. And with that, you then require to have a proper planning. And what we are trying to avoid is to rush into taking decisions that are going to have impact at the expense of being impressionable, given the kind of research that is out there. But in terms of the critical minerals, as you are saying, we are endowed with these resources, which are also critical for transition. You will know that South Africa is currently has done some substantial work on green hydrogen. There are also other resources that are minerals that are required to ensure that we accelerate that process with respect to also its contribution to RE. But we're taking our time. There's a process that department is from where I'm coming that is developing a critical minerals strategy, because we feel, and I think these are some of the things that we also deposited in our interventions in the G20 and elsewhere, where we give inputs in trying to shape this process. That these critical minerals, as much as they are required to accelerate, but it's important for us to also ensure that they do respond to the beneficiation from where they are being mined, whether it's in South Africa, elsewhere in the continent, or even outside the continent. So it's important that there is some over and above ensuring that we contribute to these technologies that require them. But it would not be helpful if they are not necessarily beneficiating those countries where they are being mined. So for us, if you take a drive into the hinterland or the rural areas, you will see the challenges that are there, and therefore those challenges should then inform us as to how we plan around these critical minerals. And how do we ensure that we put those industries in place? Because we can talk about acceleration of this, but if we are not addressing those challenges, or we are not embedding them in the decisions we are taking, it will remain a big challenge. And I think we'll continue to have these discussions even post 2030. But of course, in terms of research, documents, and policies, we are there. We have made these expressions in our long-term strategy towards net zero. As I'm indicating, there's a green hydrogen strategy that is being developed. And of course, we still have to have some engagements as to how do we then entrench that as a policy to ensure that we provide a proper direction and meaningful interventions in addressing these points that Emily has raised, because those are critical issues, that you have a continent that has got these access challenges, and it has got resources that can benefit it, but you still remain talking about 3% access and all of that. So it's a challenge that we need to address.
I think one of the key points from what you just mentioned with regard to, as we continue to develop mining and minerals projects on the continent, that we ensure that we're making sure that the value add of those projects extends to the local communities for their own local economic development, also reflects a trend that we're seeing in other resource-rich regions of the world, Latin America, for example, also thinking through, how do you use the opportunities of being a resource provider of the energy transition to move down the value chain and not just be, an extractive industry, but also produce some of the midstream processing and high value sort of components of a battery, of an electric vehicle battery or a solar panel or something like that. Your other comment with regard to the prioritization of energy access as we think about these transformations, does reverberate throughout the rest of sub-Saharan Africa, as you mentioned, it informs kind of perhaps how we should think about the partnership building process. Just to use one example which comes to mind is, take for example, Nigeria, right, which only 55% of Nigerians roughly have access to on-grid electricity, meaning that, energy access, possibly through hydrocarbons development, is going to be a priority in the short term. The perhaps opportunity for partnership then is for the de-risking of the medium-term transformation. So thinking through how you can de-risk, partnerships with distribution companies, right, for grid development. Thinking through how you can, contribute to project management and infrastructure support for smart grid systems, both on small and possibly in the longer term, larger scales, at the same time that you're, continuing to finance and explore opportunities for off-grid renewables, et cetera. But again, Emily, this comes back to models around finance. And you mentioned in your first set of remarks that there is a lot of work that still needs to be done. But my question back to you would be, are there current financing designs today that you've found to be particularly successful in terms of attracting and then deploying public and private investment in the region? And if not, what changes to how we think about financing need to be made in order to ensure that Africa has sufficient access to the funds it needs to both participate in global energy transition at the same time that it's continuing to focus on the issues around energy access and economic development that Thebe mentioned?
Okay, yes, thank you. First of all, you mentioned poverty issue, and I really think that is key. Today in Africa, we need to reconcile economic development with climate change mitigation and adaptation. So today, I really think that financing is a central part of the story. And I really think that the private sector can do much more today. And because the private sector has a financing capacity and skills which represent an opportunity for African countries to scale up their climate actions. And of course, for private investors, green projects in African markets could deliver attractive financial and impact returns. So yes, as I said, today the private sector involvement remains limited. So the private sector finances only 12% of infrastructure in Africa. It's very low. It's really, really low. So here are 4 financing tools that have been particularly successful in other countries and also in Africa. And this instrument could be scaled up. So the first tool is guarantees. So the World Bank, the African Development, and other DFIs regularly use guarantees to mobilize private investment by reducing investor risk exposure. And I really think that guarantees have a key role to play to scale up financing green infrastructure. So the second tool is blended finance. And today, blended finance has become increasingly popular. So the third tool I would like to mention is green bonds. And under the Paris Agreement, green bonds have been the most prevalent and accessible options to finance climate change mitigation and adaptation projects. But today, Africa represents only 1% of global issuance of green bonds. So I really think that with green bonds, we have a huge potential. And the fourth tool I would like to mention is public-private partnerships. So, as you know, public-private partnerships are more than a financial instrument. They marry the skills and resources of the public and private sectors while sharing the associated risk. So, Ulrich, you mentioned potential new challenges. So, I see 2 challenges. So, we need to do changes. Changes need to be made to the current investment and finance framework to ensure that Africa has access to the funds. So the first one, so overall investment and the use of these financial instruments are currently limited by global regulatory changes that resulted from the financial crisis that took place in 2008. So we need to work on that global regulatory framework. And the second change to do it's crucial to update national African regulations to unlock green financial investment from the private sector. So for me, there are the 2 changes to do to scale up financing and especially the involvement of the private sector.
So 2 changes on the private sector side. A lot of, opportunity for growth, particularly in green bonds. That data point of, only 1% of green bonds are currently, reaching the continent seems woefully insufficient. Perhaps that's why we've been so reliant on those public sector-driven partnerships, such as the JET-P that Thebe mentioned. Thebe, I guess I'll turn to you. When you reflect on these partnership models that we're seeing, whether that be bilateral partnership models, public-private partnership models, et cetera, at least from the signals we're seeing out of the United States, the JET-P model seems to be what they're really focused on. From your perspective, how has the South Africa's JET-P been in harnessing and deploying financing for energy transition? And how do you sharpen that model more effectively so we can carry forward some positive lessons as, I think we see a proliferation of JET-Ps between the United States and other countries. For example, currently a JET-P with Indonesia is under negotiation and being explored further. What from the South African JET-P experience should we be thinking about as a possible lesson, or what should we be improving upon specifically?
I think what we need, and I keep on repeating this, when the investment plan or the proposed investment plan was consulted, firstly, there's an issue of saying what is the nature of the consultation. Because those that we met from the department, but also those who were able to be in the consultations, which are taking a format of this nature, where these consultations are held in towns where people do not have access. You go to Mpumalanga, for example, you have this in Nelspruit, and people who are being affected, or even in Witbank, where people who are being affected are in a place called Wakuta. And they are struggling to come and make their inputs. So I'm saying that the fundamental issue is to have a meaningful engagement and contribution in terms of what are the requirements and the needs of the people on the ground, so that we are able to inform these investments plans. And I think what we need also to do is not to follow the pledges, because it becomes a problem. I think pledges are important, but the pledges must follow a well thought and developed plan. So if you are planning on the basis of what is being available, or what is being made available, it then becomes a problem. And these are the lessons that are coming out of JET-P, which I think it's a very important stepping stone, but it could improve if we were to invest more time trying to embed, the challenges that communities will face or are facing and will continue to face if not, purposefully engaged. Because that is the reason why, in my view, the JET-P is where it is, or JET-IP is where it is because it has not taken into consideration certain elements. And I'm saying that you go to Lephalale, Limpopo, people said, we don't know about this. There are issues of skills that we're saying, how do we ensure that these investments are going to improve those skills. You have a Thebe who has been working in a coal mining, which has to either transition in a particular way, and there has to be a reskilling of that person. And how do you ensure that this funding is geared towards also ensuring that that process is addressed? Is not being done, and you don't quite get what are these elements that you are raising. What is the level of grant that is required? Which of these pledges or the amounts that are being made available becomes concessions and all of these things. And I think it also goes back to that issue that you were raising in terms of the de-risking and all of that. It becomes a serious problem if this remains an academic exercise. And I'm respectfully saying academic exercise because it ends at this level, and then you try and implement, and then but you implement not at this level. You have to implement in the on the ground, and if people are not feeling that, it becomes a challenge. So I'm saying that we can improve through a proper and meaningful consultation, and appreciating the urgency with which we have to react, but also ensuring that we do not just react and leaving, the majority of the people behind. Because Cape Town as a city might survive, but Kailicha and all of that may not survive, and you may create a problem of now migration from those areas to this city, which has been the focus of the that process of accelerating clean energy, leaving those areas, and you are creating a problem going forward.
So what I'm hearing is two things largely. One, a lot more needs to be done almost on the discovery portion of the JETP creation to more accurately understand the needs of the local communities in terms of how they are and are going to be impacted, not just by a changing climate, but the transformation, the economic transformation of the energy transition, of the energy sector that comes from climate action and the deployment of new technologies. But then also, how do you build these partnerships in a way which are designed for immediate impact? There aren't these, I think your phrasing, while polite, of these is sometimes, the exercises being too academic in nature, is a fair criticism, particularly when, you know, these are impacting lives on the ground in very short order, and we have to take seriously the consequences of our actions in the local communities where we're going to be doing these activities. To that end, one of the specific technologies I think that I'd like your insight on, you know, is one of the technologies that frequently doesn't get, I don't think gets enough attention in terms of its potential contributions to the energy transition and a just energy transition, which is the deployment of carbon capture technologies. Now, South Africa, you know, still has a relatively high ratio of coal in its energy mix. It's a prime candidate to begin immediately deploying some of these carbon capture technologies. You know, how do you see South Africa working with the United States and other OECD countries to deploy CCUS commercially, quickly, and importantly, in an economically feasible manner, I think?
We currently discussing with the US through the embassy, as well as our geoscience partners, to say that how do we exactly respond into that. I may not necessarily be able to provide an adequate response to that, but I think it's a process that is now being undertaken, to say that CCUS is one of those technologies that, among others, can assist us in ensuring that there's proper, shift, but also proper investment opportunities in those areas where this coal, stations are concentrated. So I'm not going to be able to adequately respond to that, because it's an ongoing discussion. But I think it's a very important and critical aspects of ensuring that, as we are talking about this investment opportunities, in ensuring that we clean our environment, but also, getting people benefiting. So that is one other processes. What I also wanted to raise was that the opportunity that was missed in Mpumalanga, in Komati, for example. It was as you were moving, or we're decommissioning. And again, people will argue, perhaps even audience here will argue that from where we are sitting, we are focusing on very pedestrian and peripheral issues. But if you have been to Komati, you would understand why we would, assume this podium and say these things that we are saying. That as part of ensuring that the investment is happening, especially in those localities where the impact is going to be deposited. You go to Komati, they tell you that as Komati was being demolished, there could have been a repurposing of certain infrastructure there, and ensure that you invest so that the community is able to remain engaged. But when you demolish this, and then you take this into a private hands. You demolish, you sell the land, and then the private, those with big pocket comes there to make an investment, which investment is not going to benefit that. So I just wanted to raise that point as I wanted to say these were part of those things that needed to be considered as we are looking at how do we make investments, and how do we ensure that we shift in a manner that is encompassing. Thank you.
I notice we have about 15 minutes left in the session, and I do want to give our audience opportunity to ask questions and provide feedback. I do see one hand in the back, so if there's a microphone and a hand in front, and another hand. So I hope we do have a microphone rolling around. While we bring a microphone let's go to the front first. Before you ask your question, sir, I will, Emily, part of the work we're doing at the Atlantic Council is focused on thinking through these different regional contexts as it relates to energy transition and clean energy deployment. We will be engaging in conversations here during Africa Energy Week. We'll be moving next week to Singapore Energy Week, International Energy Week, to focus a conversation specifically as it relates to South and Southeast Asia, and then eventually we'll then move to Latin America to talk about these issues in that regional context. This will result in a series of reports that will launch over the next few months, but you'll be writing the Sub-Saharan Africa focused report. And during our discussions, you and I have talked about several kind of overarching research questions that you think are important to address here. How to leverage innovative technologies to meet decarbonization and energy access targets, as we've discussed at length just now, how to finance green energy and ensure affordability, how you can use finance and innovation to drive energy output, and overall how you can increase energy agility, reliability, and resilience. Can you talk a little bit about your thinking behind those 4 research questions and kind of unpack them a little bit, and then we'll turn to our audience for some additional discussion and engagement.
Okay, thank you very much. Yes, I'm happy to work on a report, and being here is a key opportunity to inform the report, and also, as you mentioned, to hear from the audience, to learn your thoughts, because I'm surrounded by high-level experts. So maybe a key question is, which of the clean energy have the most potential in Africa, and especially in South Africa? And I'm particularly interested in solar technology, and especially due to the off-grid potential. And yes, of course, a key question also is, how do you think that the United States can contribute to that? In my brief introduction, also, I mentioned the key challenging on financing the green energy transition. For me, this is really the central part of the story, and I would be also happy to hear from you about how to finance green energy and ensure affordability of clean energy solution. What do you think? What role for DFI? What role for donor countries, such as the United States? We can also think about how to drive innovation in energy efficiency to increase renewable energy outputs. And of course, how to increase energy agility, reliability, and resilience. How in Africa can we build resilient infrastructure? And of course, today, what is the role of governments? I really think it's a key issue. So this is the challenge is big, as Bazen mentioned, and that I really think that we need all stakeholders to scale up the development of green energy in Africa, and especially in South Africa.
Perfect. I think we'll go to our first gentleman back, and I'd only ask that you introduce yourself before asking your question or providing a comment.
Good morning. Thank you to everyone. Thank you, sorry, to you. And good morning to everyone. It's a lovely morning in Cape Town. My name is Kelvin Emmanuel. I am from Abuja, Nigeria. I run a company called Dairy Hills. And I also sit on the board of OA Nigeria. My question is simple. Africa contributes 30% to the global, carbon emissions. Africa is not yet carbonized. Lithium, cobalt, aluminum, those minerals are extracted from East Africa. A lot now these days in Nigeria, they're exported. The beneficiation is not done in Africa. Exchange rate is high. In Nigeria, the black market premium is about 32.5%. It's closed from 30.5% down to 32.5%. The exchange rate is down 79.5% in the last 10 years. And that places a serious burden on imports. So you export lithium, you do a beneficiation, convert it into solar panels, wind turbines. Wind turbines are not even a thing in Nigeria yet. Maybe in Cape Town they are a thing. And then you have this crazy exchange rate. It's difficult for you to import. Energy price is expensive for clean energy. Nigeria is still dealing with the issues on gas to power. You mentioned 55% of Nigeria has adoption for electricity because there is somewhere around maybe a 30 to 37% impairment for revenue collection from the distributing companies in Nigeria. Gas is a factor for thermal plants. So how do you talk about clean energy in Africa, considering that Africa is not yet carbonized? South Africa is dealing with load shedding. Yeah. South Africa needs gas. Yeah. Angola, Mozambique are options for gas in South Africa. How do you talk about clean energy when, isn't there supposed to be a longer period for transition for natural gas and crude oil to clean energy? Let Africa carbonize first and industrialize like the West before you talk about clean energy. Considering that the whole supply chain for clean energy, wind turbines, solar panels, it's not done in Africa. The beneficiation is not done in Africa. Isn't the discussion supposed to be backward integration for beneficiation and supply chain value addition in Africa first before you talk about, the supply chain for clean energy?
That's a wonderful point. And I think, again, it comes back to this idea of how do you manage energy transition, right, in a way which facilitates energy security and energy access and economic development. And that's the key item that I think we're looking to discuss in order to think about how do you allow, to your point, sir, how do you allow Africa to carbonize, right, and effectively enable its energy, its economic development through energy resource development, at the same time that you're allowing it to participate and engage in pathways towards the Paris Agreement and some of the commitments that countries in the region have made related to net zero by 2050. Thebe, I might put this question to you. How do we, what are the key principles that we should hold ourselves to in order to allow Africa to develop its energy resources, develop a sustainable economy, right, likely through gas or hydrocarbons to some extent, while still moving down the pathway towards an eventual Paris-aligned future? What are the technologies and ideas that we should think through with relation to that?
Yeah, thanks. I think my brother at the back there has summarized this. I attended Africa, the AU some few weeks ago, and I think we're discussing exactly what is raising there to say, with the contribution that Africa has made, and of course mapping it to Paris Agreement, to say that we have differentiated responsibilities, and therefore this issue of transition will take into account different national circumstances and capabilities. So I think what you are saying there is quite correct. And I mean, it doesn't say that Africa or South Africa is opposed to transitioning or doing certain things differently, given the challenges that are documented in some of these reports. But the most important aspect, as perhaps, and I think he has eloquently said it, that we are not so much. I think the technologies are there. We had, you just mentioned CCUS. I mentioned that South Africa is also running with green hydrogen, but where we are sitting in the department is that we need to understand and also make sure that there's a proper framing in terms of that hydrogen, because it will require certain elements. And how do we ensure that those elements, as he's saying, are not extracted, they go there and then they come back by being a final product, and it doesn't assist the developmental processes that we want to see in South Africa, in the continent. So hence we are saying we continue to discuss where it makes sense. We are prepared to collaborate. The minister met with the ambassador. We indicated that our transition also include nuclear. We know that there might be issues in terms of investment from where you are sitting or from where the US is sitting with that, but it's also a part of our technology for transition. So there's a whole suite of technologies that we want to see. And in fact, the African Union is very clear in terms of its agenda 2063. That as we are pursuing the green industrialization, but we also are pursuing other resources to ensure that we balance our transition. So to say, I'm not going to say that this or that technology, but all technologies, depending on our own circumstances, are critical and therefore should be treated as such. But also I think we need to also appreciate the issue of pace, that we are at different wavelengths. Yep. So I think if that could also be understood, it will serve us a great deal going forward. As I said, if we are following what is being put on place without necessarily looking at what are the developmental needs, we are going to come here 10 years later and still be discussing the same issues, because there will be resistance, there will be all sorts of challenges, especially in the continent and in the country.
Mm-hmm. To a few of your points, a technology neutral approach, right, which takes a wide perspective of the technologies which enable for economic development, and sustainable economic development is ultimately what we're shooting for here. Whether that be CCUS, whether that be technologies that enable hydrogen over the long term, but focusing on the immediate future, which is the need to provide sufficient energy resources for the continent to develop effectively. I'm also taken by this dynamic that the continent be expected to produce the almost the low value mineral resources needed for clean energy deployment, but then re-import those technologies at a higher cost back into the continent, and whether or not that represents a just energy transition issue that we need to think about at a macro level. So two very, very useful points here. Noting that we probably have time for two more questions to be bundled. I see one in the back, and I think we had one in the front right here. So we'll take both of those at the same time, and then we'll wrap up with our panelists for some final comments.
Thank you so much. Just to quickly advise, can you please make your questions short and succinct, and may please the speakers make the answers short and succinct. We've got 2 minutes left before the session closes. Thank you so much. May the lady please start first with the question. Thank you, and then you, sir. So sorry.
Okay, hi. My name is Lethabisa Mutweni. I'm from Lesotho, but I'm a high school student from the African Leadership Academy in Johannesburg. So my question is, okay, 53% of the population in sub-Saharan Africa does not have access to electricity. And when I look at Lesotho, I mean, people who don't have access to electricity just can't afford it, you understand? Like, they can buy it, but they can't afford it. So the question is, how does clean energy transition tie to making energy poverty history by 2030 if there is no one in the world that is going to give us electricity for free?
All right. All right.
Thank you. My name is Mustafa Babikir. I'm from Sudan originally, but I work for Saudi Aramco from Saudi, so I represent African MHC also. So I just relating to the previous intervention, I think very important the role of gas, and I would like the speaker, if they can more interpret the role of gas in terms of both development and in terms of energy access and the issue of reaching the households and providing affordable energy in terms of LPG, in terms of stoves, and there is some work of finance here, and this is some financial important matters related to distribution. The second is about de-risking, and particularly the role of the governments, the national governments, and it's clearly given the over-indebtedness after the COVID, post-COVID, then governments are not in a position to provide guarantees. So what the role of regional development banks like the African Development Bank and others can provide, because commercial finance will not be accessible with this, or the partnership in terms of the US and others, whether they can provide such guarantees, and if there is something already in place or in discussion. Thank you.
Thank you. So two questions there. One, in the back, how do we focus on not just access, but the affordability of that access being a particularly sharp issue? And then I think more broadly to the gentleman in the front, and Emily, perhaps you're best positioned to take this, de-risking. How do we effectively de-risk the pipeline to create a pipeline of bankable projects? So, and we'll factor this into kind of your concluding thoughts as well on the subject, given that we're already over time. So, Thebe, we'll go to you, and then we'll go to you, Emily.
No, thank you. I think as from where we are sitting is a transition source, and it's part of what South Africa is exploring, and I would imagine the continent. That's what I'm going to say. But it's very much part of the plans for the country going forward. The young lady, in terms of energy poverty, which is a very important thing, she said you've got access to the grid or whatever the small embedded generation that is there. Which might also be a different case if you are not on the grid, but you are on the grid, you do not have, you are just using it for lighting. My mother at home use it to light, and then she cooks using wood, and it talks to that issue of not only access but affordability, because she can only afford to buy for lighting, not to cook. So I think that is also some of the things from where we are sitting. We are now looking at the district model as a department to say how do we ensure that we use this process of ensuring that we respond to the SDG goal of access, but also affordability. And hence this talk to say, as we are investing, we must invest such that we make it easier for those people to access. I can talk to this point at length in terms of what we have done, but I'm going to leave it there to say that it's a very critical point that should inform how we transition without burdening those that are in the rural areas, including those that are in Lesotho. Thank you very much.
Emily?
Yeah. I hear your point, and I really think that there is a climate emergency, and that we really need to reconcile economic development with climate change adaptation and mitigation. We have no choice anyway. So regarding your point about de-risking, it's of course a critical issue, and I share your point. African governments cannot do it alone. So DFIs and multilateral banks have a key role to play by providing guarantees. So the World Bank, the African Development, a lot of different international banks are doing that very well. It's key to continue. I really think that there won't be private investment without guarantee. So we need to provide guarantees. The World Bank has to provide guarantee to de-risk investment. And maybe in the near future, maybe in 10 years or maybe more, we won't need guarantees anymore. But for the moment, yes, this is crucial to develop, to leverage, and to scale up private investment in infrastructure projects.
Thank you. So 3 big issues I'm taking away from this panel. One, a just energy transition partnership must put energy access and affordability at the front of those partnership developments. We need to think through seriously what the models for effectively de-risking energy projects are, and take a technology approach to how we finance, a technology neutral approach to how we finance those activities. And finally, we need to think through the balance of relationships between the OECD and the continent as these partnerships developed. A relationship based on exporting raw materials and importing clean energy technologies at a higher cost is simply not a just energy transition. So keeping that front of mind at the macro level as we move forward to COP28 and beyond is also particularly critical. I'd like to thank the audience for joining us today. Thank you to our panelists. And with that, I apologize for running about 5 minutes over time.
No worries. Thank you so much. A round of applause.